Stephanie, we have not really talked about climate change and climate change regulations for a while. And Biden just committed to spending a shit ton of American tax dollars on his latest climate initiatives. So, with that, like I said, happy Friday, and let's dive right into this. So, on Monday, we had Earth Day, and Biden chose to commemorate that looking like a old fuck lost in the woods at Prince William Forest Park in Virginia. And he was giving a press conference where he said that anyone who denies the impact of climate change is, quote, condemning the American people to a very dangerous future, end quote. And all I could think, Stephanie, was like it's like when he condemned the COVID vaccine deniers, that they were sentencing the country to a winter of severe illness and death back in 2022. But the Biden admin is not going to let this happen, and they are going to spend astronomical amounts of your tax dollars to prove it. And they're doing this all with the help of equally useless DEI initiatives. So before we get into it too much, I want to play this clip from Fox News of Biden's essentially garbled nonsense speech during the press conference on Monday.
In red and blue states, there's still those who deny climate is in crisis. Our MAGA Republican friends don't seem to think it's in crisis. They actually want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides the funding for a vast majority of these projects, and roll back clean air protections for clean air and clean water. And I'm not going to go into it now, but I'm not making it up. It's real. Just listen to what they say. Anyone in or out of government who willfully denies the impacts of climate change is condemning the American people to a very dangerous future in the world, I might add. They want to take us backwards, sideline our workers, let China and others lead the race for clean energy. I'm determined, absolutely determined, that we move forward. We move forward.
Yes, Mr. President.
He always just sounds so angry. It just doesn't even make sense the way he does that.
Because that's called dementia.
Yeah. So did you see the clip? I think it was when he was in Florida where he says, 4 more years, pause. And he starts reading the narration cues. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's ridiculous.
Like every speech he gives. And after mumbling this nonsense, saying he's not going to get into it now, but assuring the crowd that he's not making it up and he's telling the truth, which we know is code for him lying, because that's what he says every time he lies. And then, of course, he went into the usual, at this point, yawn-worthy narrative of blaming the manufactured climate crisis on Trump and red states. So during this press conference, Biden announced his latest programs. There's 2 of them, Stephanie. One is the Solar for All plan. And this is where the EPA is investing $7 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act to give grants to low-income and disadvantaged communities across America so that they can benefit from residential solar power. And during his speech, Biden said, quote, "It's a big deal. The new Solar for All program means that 900,000 households, 900,000 will have solar on their rooftops for the first time. And soon millions of families will save over $400 a year in utility bills. And that's $350 million nationwide," end quote. Because that's what low-income families need. Not lower food costs, not lower gas prices. They need solar panels. And then the second program Biden introduced on Monday is called the American Climate Corps. And this is his new initiative to provide over 2,000 jobs in 36 states so that Americans can apply and get paid to fight climate change by learning how to install solar panels, fight wildfires. I think we already have people that do that, rebuild wetlands, and winterize homes. Oh, and he praised AOC for this asinine speech she gave where she thanked him for launching this American Climate Corps, and she compared it to when Franklin Roosevelt started the Civilian Conservation Corps back in 1933, which did help create hundreds of state parks. But Biden called AOC, quote, the Congress lady. And he said, I learned a long time ago, listen to that lady. Listen to that lady. we're going to talk more about another part of the world too, really quickly, end quote. Like, what the fuck does that mean?
I don't think he knows what that means. I think it's the dementia kicking in and he's in La La Land. I'm sure she loved that remark where he's calling her, that Congress lady. I don't think the guy knows what decade he's even in. Like, it's so bad. Oh, and the other flap that is going around social media is I don't even know where he was, but he says Trump keeps proving that we can't be trusted. And everyone's like,
Yes, he
yeah, he
does.
does. Like, you're right. You can't be trusted. But speaking of like the whole climate crisis agenda, listen to this clip that I came across of Chuck Schumer being interviewed by Rachel Maddow.
President's cabinet.
Can I say one other thing on climate?
Please.
I think it might be a good idea for President Biden to call a climate emergency
Why?
because it relates to what you're saying. Then he can do many, many things under the emergency powers of the president that wouldn't have to go through, that he could do without legislation. Now, Trump used this emergency for a stupid wall, which wasn't an emergency. But if there ever was an emergency, climate is one. So I would suggest that they explore looking at climate as an emergency, which would give them more flexibility. After all, it's a crisis. It's a crisis.
My jaw hit the floor. The freaking guy is saying the quiet part out loud. He's saying, oh, yeah, just say there's a climate emergency. And she's like, why? I mean, like, what's going on with the climate? No, it has nothing to do with the climate. It'll just give him, emergency powers. Like, what the hell? They're so corrupt. They can't even lie anymore. They're telling us what they're doing.
This also ties in with what we talked about on Wednesday with the global pandemic initiative, because they can use a climate crisis as a quote pandemic.
Right. Yeah. And so I found an article that was talking about this, and it said that the Center for Biological Diversity was looking at this, and they estimate that if Biden does declare a climate emergency, it would give him around 130 wartime powers over a climate emergency that they're making up because it has nothing to do with the climate and it's all about control and power. It's unreal.
And fucking scary.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. It's so frightening. Okay, I can't. Okay, as usual. All right, let's talk about the money.
Yes.
Let's talk about the money and these climate initiatives, Stephanie, because this is going to blow your fucking mind too. So I was reading this article in the New York Sun, and it was talking about like the insane amount of regulatory spending that the Biden admin has done. And the article referenced a report by an organization called the American Action Forum. So I looked this thing up, and it, excuse me, it was started back in 2009. And it's led by Douglas Holtz-Eakin. He's a former director of the Congressional Budget Office. And part of what this organization does is they like analyze economic, domestic, and fiscal policy issues. And apparently they conduct a weekly series called Week in Regulation. And according to their data, excuse me, now I can't speak. This past week of spending by the Biden administration, this past week alone, has been a quote jaw-dropping regulatory record, end quote. Unlike any other week in over 13 years that this organization has been tracking federal government regulations. The AAF compared regulatory activity from Biden, Trump, and Obama. They tracked it from like the president's inauguration day to April 19th of the president's fourth year. And results showed that President Biden has spent over $1.37 trillion. Now, by comparison, and this is just on regulatory issues. By comparison, Trump spent $30.1 billion and Obama spent $303.1 billion. There's a big difference here, right? And this past week, and this past week alone, the Biden admin spent $875.3 billion, and they added $4.7 million in annual paperwork burden hours. So in context, this is just This week alone is just 20 billion less than what President Obama spent during 2 complete terms in office. Like, let that sink in. And what's even more ridiculous is that the Biden admin has put less regulatory rules into effect than either Obama or Trump, but the cost of Biden's programs has been billions and billions of dollars more in what is being called a regulatory tsunami. And so, what has the Biden admin been spending this astronomical amount of regulatory funds on? Well, you guessed it, climate change initiatives. So, including like the stringent vehicle emission standards. Apparently, there's a new Department of Energy efficiency standards for general service lamps. And the Department of Labor regulations um, recently like created new minor exposure standards. And according to this report, the EPA's latest tailpipe emissions rule for passenger vehicles is what moved the Biden admin into this trillion-dollar territory. And overall, the Biden admin has spent $276 million in what they're calling the annual paperwork burden hours, just for paperwork. And the report said, quote, it was one thing for the current administration to surpass the first term total of the Obama administration. This past week's total alone, however, nearly matched the entire Obama presidency. For perspective, if the Biden administration regulatory cost were a country, its gross domestic product would rank 17th in the world, just behind Indonesia, end quote.
Okay, those numbers are astonishing. Like anyone out
Yes.
there listening, if you have someone that is arguing about Trump versus Biden, that is a great point to bring up. When you compare Biden spending the same amount in 1 week that Obama did in all 8 years. And I mean, I say it all the time. This president is clearly compromised. And I'm sorry, but when you have someone that took millions of dollars in foreign money when he was vice president, and now he's spending over $1 trillion on regulatory bullshit. To me, that sounds like laundering. It sounds like there's some shady deals being made to enrich someone, probably him and his family. So, like, it's mind boggling. I don't know how you could possibly spend that much on fucking regulations. It's crazy. And I think Congress is just as compromised. I think they're all enriching themselves, and we are going to be the ones to suffer. The American taxpayer is the one that's going to foot the bill and suffer from this.
Yeah. And do you want to know where the Department of Energy is sending some of our money?
Sure, why not?
So we apparently have sent a bunch of US grant money to an Iranian professor at a sanctioned Iranian school that has been helping Iran with its nuclear program.
Are you
So
fucking kidding?
no, last week there was a Senate Armed Services Committee, and DOE Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who I can't stand, she was asked why we're sending grant funds to a sanctioned nuclear program. And her response was that she wasn't familiar with this particular grant, but she'd be sure to follow up and let them know. Like, yeah, I'm sure she's going to get back to them ASAP on that. Like, it's fucking insane.
That is terrible. Like, that's what happens when you spend so much money. First of all, they probably don't know. They probably can't keep track of it. And I feel like everyone in the world is getting a piece of it except for the American taxpayers.
Yeah.
And the fact that like we are literally on the verge of war with Iran. They're already in this war with our biggest ally, and we're giving them money to the people that are helping to build the nuclear weapon. I mean, wake up, people. Like, wake up. That's astonishing. Everything you have said so far is astonishing. Everyone needs to like bookmark this podcast and send it to every freaking Biden voter you can possibly think of, because these are like hardcore facts that you can't deny. This is insane. And he can't be voted back in. I mean, I don't know how we're going to make it even till the election is over at this point.
Yeah. And this is just regulatory spending. I mean, this doesn't
Yeah.
even count all the other shit that he spends money on. And like this is just climate related. It's fucking insane. But let's move on to another topic, because obviously we have to talk about TikTok. And I know you are going to have a lot to say about the TikTok ban.
Oh my gosh, I've been waiting to talk about this, hoping, keeping my fingers crossed that it wouldn't go through, but it did. And, it was tucked right in this $95 billion spending bill, which we talked about in the last episode. I'm still pissed about. But yeah, they throw the TikTok ban in a bill that's funding war. Like,
Mhm.
why? Why? You know what I mean? It's crazy. So, and I'll get to like a conspiracy theory in a second on that I told you about before we started recording. But basically, this bill that was just signed by Biden says that TikTok has 9 months to sell to like an American owned company, or it's going to face a nationwide prohibition. So TikTok released a statement saying that this is unconstitutional, and their statement said, quote, "We believe the facts and the law are clearly on our side and we will ultimately prevail. The fact is, we have invested billions of dollars to keep US data safe and our platform free from outside influence and manipulation. This ban would devastate 7 million businesses and silence 170 million Americans," end quote. And I agree with that completely. And you know
Mhm.
what? Just look at the American social media platforms like Meta and Twitter, where we know for a fact that they colluded with the government to censor Americans and collect our data and make these lists that are going to the FBI. And like, look at how many lawsuits there have been with Meta. For example, the one that is accusing Mark Zuckerberg of lying to the public about Facebook and Instagram being harmful to children because they allegedly hid study results that showed how addictive it is, especially for young kids. And then there's also this $725 million class action lawsuit settlement last year where Meta was accused of sharing user data with third parties. Like they've already been convicted of this. Like there was a settlement on this. TikTok hasn't been. So what the hell? Then you also have Meta that was fined $1.3 billion last year for violating the EU's data privacy rules. So it's like, who's the real bad guy here? Seems like the American companies aren't doing a very good job. And our government doesn't seem to be worried about any of that at all. So we know that it has nothing to do with protecting data. That's just their cover story. This is all about controlling the narrative. And to be honest, TikTok is destroying their narrative because too many people are communicating all over the world via TikTok and waking up to the corruption of the United States government. And people are also uniting on TikTok and realizing that there is this uniparty and it doesn't have to be Democrats versus Republicans. But here's a wild idea. What about just letting the American people decide whether or not we want to use the app? Like, let us decide what we want to do with our data. I mean, think about how many other apps and companies are Chinese owned. We use them every
Right.
day. Those are allowed. I'm sure some of those third parties that Meta sold our data to are China owned. So again, like this has nothing to do with protecting Americans. Don't fall for that BS excuse. This is about controlling the American people and our perception. And just look at like how many Congress members have TikTok accounts. Biden has a TikTok account. And like he's got this whole initiative around bringing TikTok influencers to the White House. So clearly he's not worried about his data. And the hypocrisy, okay? It's no surprise because we know that hypocrisy is like basically the theme of this administration. But like literally the same day he signs this ban, his account, Biden's account, has a new post out on TikTok. It's just like you can't even make this shit up. So let's just call it what it is, a last ditch effort to gain control of the one platform they don't have control of. The one platform that didn't collude with government agencies. And you know what? They want access to TikTok's algorithm. Everybody does. And they're going to be a bully and just steal it. They, again, like if they have that, then they can continue to control the narrative and continue to push out the propaganda and censor anything that goes against it. And of course, what does everything come down to? Money, profit, right? So they're going to try and force TikTok to sell. And I guarantee that everyone that voted yes for this bill have their investors lined up waiting to buy it, and they're all going to get a piece of the pie. You know what? Like, that is not a free market. That is not how it should work. We shouldn't be forcing companies to sell. And at the end of the day, like, there is no way TikTok is going to comply. I don't, they said they won't. I don't think they will. They're certainly not going to hand over their algorithm to the United States. So I think TikTok has pretty much already said that there's going to be a lawsuit. While I don't have any faith in our justice system anymore, I don't think ultimately TikTok's going to go away. I think there's a couple different options here. So I think the CEO might cave to the bullying and allow our government agencies access, just like Meta and Twitter did, which we found out in the Twitter files. That's a possibility. But like, the fact that Biden signed this bill during election season, I think this is going to be the nail in the coffin on his reelection, because you have 170 million Americans use TikTok. Most Americans say this is where they're getting their primary source of information. They're not going to be happy about this. Same with all the small business owners, millions of small business owners that rely on TikTok for their income, their primary income. And then you have the American Civil Liberties Union that said that banning or requiring divestiture of TikTok would set an alarming global precedent for excessive government control over social media platforms. So basically what they're saying is this bill gives Biden, the president, the ability to ban or force the sale of other foreign-owned apps that it deems security threats. And they would have complete like autonomy over that. And you have Patrick Toomey, who's the deputy director of the American Civil Liberties Union, National Security Project. And he put out a statement saying that the Constitution protects Americans' ability to access information from around the world and to express themselves online. And the government has put forward no evidence that would overcome the extraordinarily high bar required to ban a social media app like TikTok. So he also said that the ACLU is quote, considering our role in any potential litigation challenging a federal ban, end quote. So what I think is they're going to sue. The ACLU is going to sue. TikTok's going to sue. And Tara, I think this could go all the way to the Supreme Court. And I really hope it does, because I think that this is a huge infringement on our First Amendment right to free speech. And ultimately, like I said, I don't think TikTok's going anywhere. I think that the law is on their side. I think they'll win in the court. And hopefully by then, Biden will be out of office.
Well, okay, here's the thing. They're trying to like sell this whole thing as it's not banning TikTok. It's just making TikTok owned by an American company. We're trying to separate it from the Chinese Communist Party, right? So that all this American data isn't at risk. But I know you have your little conspiracy theory, but I want to tell you mine, because as you mentioned earlier, there's what, 170 million Americans that use TikTok, and it's mostly popular among like young people and the Gen Zers and like people with small businesses. So this is going to obviously impact voting for Biden, I would think.
Yeah.
And so if they're going ahead with this, and Biden's going ahead with it at a time when he's already struggling for votes, what this tells me is that they don't give a fuck. They don't care. There's not going to be a normal election, because if they really cared about, promoting Biden and getting votes, they would have waited and done this later. They wouldn't be doing it now. So to me, this is saying it's like yet another slap in the face of like, we really don't care what the American people think. We are going full on with this totalitarian plan because you're not going to have elections. You're not going to have a choice. And it doesn't matter whether we institute it now or later, because no one's going to stop us. So like, that's what I think.
It's a good point. It's a good point. And there could be two reasons behind that. It could be that they want to make sure that Biden is like so unfavorable that way at the Democratic convention, they can slip in their secret candidate. Like, that could be an option. But it also kind of goes along with my little conspiracy theory. which is, we've talked about this many, many times. If there is a war, then they don't have to hold elections, right? So it would benefit the administration if we were in war, they could just keep Biden in there. And do they know something about like China invading Taiwan, for example, that we don't know as the American public? Because, you know, thinking about how Mike Johnson flipped so easily to pass this bill, like, is there something that they know about a world war starting before the election? And if you're in a world war with China, the last thing you want is China to have control over 170 million Americans' news information. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's like there could be that aspect to it as well. And I know they predicted that, like, I think it was by 2030 or 2027, China would invade Taiwan. But if you were China, like, wouldn't you do that before Trump gets back in office? So it's
Yes.
like, I could see him doing it, you know, this year while we have a weak leader and while there's all these other wars going on and our money is like gone and depleted to all these other countries. So it's like, there could be that. And that could be a reason that Mike Johnson flipped so easily. But I don't know. We'll see.
But what also confuses me is TikTok is, you know, one of the freest speech platforms, but it's still not a free speech platform because we've mentioned this multiple times. Our episodes get banned on TikTok all the time. Our content gets taken down. We get flagged for things. Like I even put up a video yesterday and you had to go in and make changes to like hashtags I'd posted because they're like things that would get flagged. And is the CCP monitoring words like pandemic and you know the WHO and the CDC, or is it the American government that's complicit in monitoring these things? Because it's really, in my mind, not even a true free speech platform when we're saying things that are not hate speech. It's not violence. It's not anything that would be banned, but you mention certain words and it gets taken down. So
Yeah. So I think it's like the AI algorithm or whatever that picks up on certain words and will just like automatically ban something. And I think that that was TikTok's way of trying to appease the American government by saying, like, look, we're not allowing like people to talk about pandemics and election interference to try to like show that they're being, you know, responsible or whatever. And now that
cloud
that didn't
seeding.
work, yeah.
We can't even talk about weather modification. You can't say the
Right.
word like
But now that
it's
it didn't
crazy.
work, wouldn't it be awesome if TikTok's like, well, fuck you, Biden. Like, we're going to let people
Yeah.
really say what they want and they don't have to talk in code anymore. Like, that would be amazing. So we'll
Yes, it
see
would.
because your video didn't get taken down and there was
Not yet.
some mention of like pandemic and stuff. So
But the other thing too is what this is supposed to happen in 9 months, which is after the
9 months,
election.
but they can extend it to a whole year if TikTok is showing like progress in divestiture.
But that's still before the election. So that confuses me too. Unless there's just going to be this push to have it go to an American company within the next few months so that it's done before the election and they can control it.
Well, there's lots of different things going through my mind. Okay. The first thing is like they're being a bully. And is this the way that they're going to gain control of TikTok before the election by saying,
Yeah.
like, you better freaking let us like into your back system or whatever? Or the other thing, like, look at what Biden did before he left office as vice president. He set up a lot of cushy jobs for his family to enrich themselves.
Yes.
What a great way for all these congressmen to become billionaires where you get your investor people lined up and ready to buy because there are lots of people ready to swoop in and buy up TikTok. And
Do you
so
mean
they
like the way Nancy Pelosi has become a billionaire?
I wouldn't be surprised. She's probably the first one that has her investor lined up to buy. So
I
it's like
know.
this is like their retirement plan. We're gonna buy, you know, the biggest social media platform that's out there. Or it could be it doesn't matter who's president. It doesn't matter if it happens after the election because it's the CIA that's really running things and they want
Yeah.
control of TikTok. So it's like there's lots of reasons in which it's happening after the election, but damn, it's like I am going to be devastated. Like so many people are going to be devastated if TikTok's gone.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm not happy.
None of us are, but okay. Let's try to end on a funny note, okay? Because
Please. Yes.
I saved this till the end, even though we talked about some of Biden's recent blunders earlier. Lion Biden has once again told the public like so much more nonsensical bullshit that isn't true this week. So, Stephanie, I don't know if you remember this or not. It was like, I don't know. At this point, I can't keep track of all the lies. But back in 2021, he was giving a speech at a college in Minnesota about like how great the Biden admin's infrastructure work is. And he was telling attendees that he used to drive a tractor trailer for the summer. So he knows about driving big trucks. And at the time, this was debunked by like multiple sources, including PolitiFact. And they said, quote, the closest experience he had was in 1973 when, as a senator, he rode on a 536-mile tractor trailer trip from Delaware to Ohio, end quote. Well, this past Tuesday, according to the Daily Caller, he was at a campaign stop in Florida, and he again told people that he used to be a big rig driver. So apparently there were like Teamsters in the crowd, and one of them credited Biden for getting his pension. And Biden's response was, quote, we did get that done. Anyways, besides, I used to drive an 18-wheeler, end quote. Yeah. And like, I bet your cannibal uncle or whatever it was you said last week is the one who taught you how to drive those trucks.
Oh, and don't forget he was raised in the Black church in a Puerto Rican
Oh,
neighborhood, you know.
right.
Like he can't
God.
even keep the lies straight. And by the way, like there was no crowd to see him here in Florida. There were maybe like 12 people that showed up. And I was watching Benny Johnson was there at it was at Hillsborough Community College where Biden was like speaking or whatever. And so he was Benny Johnson's walking around and like asking people about it. And they're like, what? They're like, who's here? Biden? They're like, we didn't know. Like nobody knew, nobody cared. It's such a joke. And you know, somehow this guy got the most votes in history, but can't seem to get more than 12 people out to see him. So, and I'm just thinking that Teamster that you're talking about was probably like a paid actor or like one of his staff members that are like trying to keep him on track so he doesn't veer off.
Probably.
Oh
I
my
wouldn't
gosh.
doubt it.
You can't make this shit up, but
Yeah.
at least it's like a good, you know, note to end on and have a little bit of a laugh. So I hope that cheers everyone up. I hope you have a great day and thanks for tuning in.